Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. They got so many promotions going on every day, giving out boosts, slashing lines. Check it out. It's a whole lot of fun. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 151 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast, Tap That. And we are looking forward to UFC Paris this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
And so, a few other things. Go check out my interlude episodes with Julius Juicebox Walker, preparing for his fight with UFC veteran Bevan Lewis. Check out my episode with Courtney Cameron, who just won the Police Diamond Gazette belt for BYB this past weekend by Dr. Stoppage. Congratulations to her. And there's a ton of combat sports this week. Aries FC's tomorrow afternoon. Today, if you're listening on Thursday. PFL Europe. Brave. Ryzen.
Break out the red panties.
Y'all know that I love Ryzen. Contender Series has been going on every week. Michaela Mayer is fighting on Friday. Alicia Baumgartner is fighting on Friday. Cage Fury. There's and UAE Warriors as well. It's a big week of combat sports, and the UFC comes back from a week-long hiatus. For my picks on all of that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday throughout the early afternoon and throughout the card. The card actually starts at noon. So come on out, let's talk about your DFS and sports betting strategy for UFC Paris. And check out my MMA DFS Value Picks article coming out on Friday afternoons, week in and week out. Again, we got UFC Paris this weekend. Saturday afternoon, early afternoon. We've got 14 fights on this card. Since we're coming off a week-long hiatus, let's just get right into it. A lightweight matchup between Bolaji Oki and Chris Duncan. Combined record of 20-3 between these two guys. Oki is the minus 178 favorite. Duncan the plus 153 underdog. Oki on the Contender Series got a first-round knockout over Dylan Salvador. Made his UFC debut with a split decision victory over Timmy Kuamba, February of this year. Born in 1995, Chris Duncan, born in 1993, who will be at a 2-inch reach disadvantage here in the lightweight division. Plenty of UFC and Contender Series experience for him at this point. You know, he lost his first time to Vyacheslav Borshev by knockout on the Contender Series, rattled off 3 straight victories over Charlie Campbell, Omar Morales, and Yanel Ashmouz, coming off a first-round rear naked choke loss to Manuel Torres. The other thing I will say about Oki, the native of Belgium, the Zulu Warrior, currently ranked 120 in the world at lightweight, 5 wins by knockout, 3 by decision in his career. This is a guy that was kind of unassuming. You know, he was in European Beatdown, Levels Fight League, and Atomic. Just Atomic, I think is all it's called. So maybe it didn't come into the biggest of organizations, like, you know, Scotland's Chris Duncan, who was in Bellator a couple of times, a few times actually. So, you know, ultimately, whose run in the UFC to this point am I more impressed with? I would probably have to say, Oki, I suppose. Duncan just has more behind it, you know? He's got more experience in the UFC. You can definitely give some credit to the wins over Yanel Ashmouz and Omar Morales. You know, Omar Morales is a guy that, say what you will about him, but he ended up is 4-4 in the UFC after that loss to Duncan March of 2023. I I am going to be rooting for Oki, for sure. But I do see the value absolutely in Chris Duncan plus 153. I think that this is a close fight. I think the UFC experience is going to be a bigger deal for Duncan, especially coming off a loss to a guy like Manuel Torres. Oki has one career win by submission, but it's not exactly his, path to victory. I like, in Duncan's 2 decision wins, he combined for 138 strikes, 7 takedowns. So, I don't know. I just think between these two guys, I think it's, ultimately very, very close between them. So I'm kind of surprised to see Duncan at plus 153. In terms of trying to come up with like a method of victory here, I think Oki by knockout is reasonable. That is plus 110. Duncan by decision, that's plus 325. I think that, is if he relies more on his mixed martial arts game, but I think that is a reasonable number. Over 2.5 is plus 114 here. I don't know. This is one that maybe I stay away from, except for maybe a little, sprinkle on Duncan money line. I like Oki by knockout, but plus 110 in a fight like this between these guys at this level of experience in the UFC, I'm not like super confident in anything on this one. I'm excited to watch it. I think for DFS purposes, I think both these guys are going to be, definitely in play, and that's something, that's saying something considering there's 14 fights on this card. So, yeah, I think in DFS, reasonable. If I'm going anything, I'm going Duncan money line or like, Oki by knockout. Maybe if that number changes. Oki by decision is plus 325. Maybe that's the reasonable one. But, like, I think Duncan is going to, like, I can, even if Duncan wins this by decision, and I think, that, again, that's a possibility, I still think that there's a good chance that he gets hurt in this fight by Oki, even in a fight that he wins. Next up, we got a women's bantamweight matchup between Nora Cornole and Jacqueline Cavalcanti. Very disappointed. All right, I named this episode "What About Germaine?" a reference to an Eminem and Dr. Dre diss track of Jermaine Dupri before Germaine de Randamie withdrew in the fight against Nora Cornole. Damn shame. But this is the matchup we have ended up with. Combined record between these two fighters is 15-2. Let's start off with Nora Cornole. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's French and whatnot. 2 wins in the UFC, 2 for 2 against Jocelyn Edwards by unanimous decision, and a second-round knockout over Melissa Mullins, April of this year. Born in 1989, Jacqueline Cavalcanti, born in 1997, 8 years Nora's junior. 2 wins in the UFC against Zara Faern, who is also French. September of last year by unanimous decision, outstriking her 126-39. Josiane Nunes, she beat her by split decision, 91-52 in the striking. It's almost perfect. They each have 2 UFC fights. They each have 2 UFC wins. I think Cavalcanti minus 210, which is like what that number's at. I think that is very appropriate. Nora's wins, the Jocelyn Edwards one I'll give you, but that, you got taken down 5 times and only landed 40 strikes. You put yourself dangerously close in that situation, especially with Jocelyn Edwards, of ending up in a weirdly close decision. 2 judges scored at 30-27, so it's not that big of a deal. But, a win over Melissa Mullins doesn't do a whole lot for me, necessarily. But Cavalcanti, the wins over Nunes, who's 3-2 in the UFC, Zara Faern, who, might be older and, born in 1983, but, her 2, introductory UFC fights were Felicia Spencer and Megan Anderson. This is somebody who was like a very good featherweight, for some time. One of those that was kind of holding it down for just a little bit of time. Was that fight at? It was a catchweight. Okay, yeah, that rings the bell. So, they don't have props out for this one yet, which is kind of surprising. It's not like this was super last second. We've known about this for a little bit. Cavalcanti minus 210. the over 2.5 rounds is minus 350. That makes complete sense. I think that, like, the eye test of the way her wins, the competition level that her wins have been over, even though she's the one coming in on short notice, and I think that is something to consider, but this is a different animal than Nora Cornell that was preparing to fight. Cavalcanti, I see this as being like, I think she's great for DFS. The striking volume that she has demonstrated over her 2 victories, a combined 217 strikes across her 2 UFC fights. I think the most reasonable option here is Jacqueline Cavalcante by decision. Again, don't have that number out yet, but and I think in DFS, I think she's going to be very reasonable, or a good option for scoring. But I don't know how expensive she's going to be. I was going to use a sound drop there, but I would have been forcing it. So far, I like Cavalcanti. I feel strongly about that one, and by decision, I think makes the most sense. Whereas on that first fight, Oki and Duncan, that's a toss-up. And recent history shows me that if it feels like a toss-up, don't get brave.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
Hell with that. It's fun to be brave. All right, next up, we got a flyweight matchup between Daniel Barez and Victor Altamirano. Altamirano is the minus 125 favorite. Barez the plus 105 underdog. Well, let's start with Barez. All right, 16-6 as a pro, hailing from the country of Spain, 35 years old, ranked number 62 in the world at flyweight. Came in from UWC, and this is not... So, I don't know why in the hell these numbers are what they are. I am genuinely confused. I like UWC. I like regional promotions that, are sending talent from different countries into the UFC and into the upper levels of MMA. But for God's sake, the records of the 3 opponents that he beat, and hell, let's go 4, all right? Because he has a Contender Series loss, too, to Carlos Hernandez by split decision back in 2021. He's 35 now, okay? That was 3 years ago. Opponents' records, 4 fights before his UFC debut. 10-9-1, 7-9, 6-9, 14-12. And then he gets subbed in round 1 by Rafael Filo, July of last year, in his UFC debut. Victor Altamirano, on the other hand, right? This is a guy look, that Felipe dos Santos fight, I thought he won that. I had money on him. That might be why. But for God's sake, win on the Contender Series by split decision, 100 strikes, 4 takedowns. Then he loses to Carlos Hernandez by split decision, as Daniel Barez did 3 years ago. Knockout victory over Daniel Lacerda, a decision over Vinicius Salvador, 62 strikes and 3 takedowns. He loses a unanimous decision to Tim Elliott, a long staple of the featherweight division. And then he's coming off that split decision loss to Felipe dos Santos in a fight that I thought he won. Why is Victor Altamirano only a minus 125 favorite? Hammer that. I think Victor Altamirano wins this fight I really think he wins this 75 to 80 times out of 100. Victor Altamirano really has never looked horrible to me in the UFC, and I don't think that he's really capable of ascending past a certain level. I think, Tim Elliott might be the line of a guy that even on his best night he wouldn't be able to beat. But Daniel Barez I don't think belongs in the UFC at all. And especially at 35 years old, it's not like he's getting thrown to the wolves, but this is an incredibly tough follow-up task, but I guess that's kind of what you have to do when you're in this situation. Altamirano minus 125, absolutely hammer that. And then, method of victory, I don't think you need to. I think minus 125 is such a gift of a number. Altamirano by knockout is plus 1250? That doesn't make any sense at all. But Altamirano by decision plus 140, that's very reasonable too. I'm going to like Altamirano in DFS. And what I will say to Daniel Barez.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
That's a very curious matchup, and Victor Altamirano, I think, is better than his record really indicates. 2 split decision losses that he easily could have won, and one that I, again, think he should have won. That's all I think we need to do on that one. I'm satisfied. Next up, women's bantamweight, Eileen Perez against Daria Zelezniakova. I'm going to call her Daria for the rest of the time because I'm satisfied enough with my first attempt at that pronunciation. Eileen Perez is the minus 232 favorite. Daria, the plus 197 underdog. Daria, 9-1 as a pro, 28 years old, hailing from St. Petersburg, Russia. 26th in the world currently, according to Tapology, in the women's bantamweight division. 5 wins by knockout, 4 by decision. She has a UFC win against Montserrat Ruiz by unanimous decision March of this year. In that fight, she outstruck Montserrat 57-25. She did get taken down 3 times. And, before the UFC, she was in Aries FC. Wasn't the champion there, surprisingly. But, she has a loss to Melissa Mullins, who, we already mentioned here. Only 4 fights since after December of 2021. 2 in 2022, 1 in 2023. And her fight against Montserrat Rendon. The hell was I saying Ruiz that whole time? Montserrat Rendon, March of this year. I like Aries FC, all right? She's got 3 fights there. She's 2-1 with a loss against a fighter who is of a kind of a bare minimum or, entry-level UFC resume in Melissa Mullins, for what that tells us. But she did win her UFC debut. We will give her, I don't have to give her that. She took it. Credit to her. Eileen Perez lost that UFC debut to Stephanie Egger, and a lot of by a rear naked choke, and a lot of us at that point in September 2022 thought, there's not a whole lot here with Eileen Perez. Then rattles off 3 straight unanimous decision victories against Ashley Evans Smith, 60 strikes, 10 takedowns. Against Lucy Pudilova, 42-20 in the striking, 2 takedowns. She knocked down Jocelyn Edwards June of this year. Outstruck her 42-27 with 6 takedowns. That is 18 combined takedowns across her 3-fight winning streak, all by unanimous decision. Again, okay, this one isn't as crazy. But, I still... Daria. If Montserrat Rendon gets you down 3 times, and you outstrike her 57-25, we've seen Eileen outstrike her last, really all 4 of her opponents in the UFC, just happened to get subbed against Stephanie Egger. It seems too easy to say, Eileen Perez by decision, which is minus 140. I think Eileen wins this fight probably, again, 75 to 80 times out of 100. Maybe 70 to 75, because Daria seems to have moved past, a couple of her hiccups, wins her UFC debut. People turn a corner. That happens. Over 2.5 rounds, minus 275. I think Eileen is going to be looking to, I think that at least 3 takedowns is in the cards. I think in DFS, I think she might be a little too expensive, considering that I don't think it's super likely she lands a ton of strikes. I let Eileen by submission plus 1,200, by knockout plus 550. Real quick, a breakdown of Eileen's 10 professional wins. The 29-year-old Argentinian, 1 win by submission, 4 by knockout, 5 by decision. I think by decision probably makes the most sense, especially if Eileen is going to be looking to get some takedowns. I think that after the halfway point of this fight, after some of that damage has been done on the ground, if you're looking for an Eileen finish, makes the most sense. So maybe Eileen by knockout TKO plus 550 is a slightly better value. I do think Eileen by decision minus 140 is probably by far the most likely single method of victory in this fight. If you're going Daria, I don't know, plus 197 for the questions that we might still have. I don't know if that's quite good enough, but Daria by decision plus 400, I think that probably makes the most sense. I don't know, people like Eileen Perez, or people hate her, but people know her name, and people, she gets eyes on her. Her methods of doing so are varied, for sure, but hey, 3-fight winning streak after losing her UFC debut, all right? She is the rightful favorite in this situation. Next up, we've got a bantamweight matchup between Taylor Lapilus and Vince Morales. Vince Morales is the plus 290 underdog. Taylor Lapilus, the minus 365 favorite. Vince Morales, right, is 3-6 in the UFC. All right. Now, who has he fought? And this counts the Contender Series, too. Now, he has losses to Song Yadong, Benito Lopez, Chris Gutierrez, Jonathan Martinez, and Miles Johns.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
So, only one of those fighters that I named was able to actually put him away, and it was Chris Gutierrez. So, he's been in there with some absolute killers and at least made it the distance. His last fight in the UFC was November of 2022. Wins over Draco Rodriguez, Luis Smolka, Ayman Zahabi. Unfortunately, those 3 wins came in 2021 and May of 2019. Taylor Lapilus, on the other hand, in the UFC is 5-2 with wins over Calvin Lofron, Cody Stamann. That was his last win, June of this year, by unanimous decision, outstriking Stamann 100-59. His only loss here to Eric Perez. That came all the way back. Wait, oh my God, I forgot how nuts this is. Taylor Lapilus, I forgot, started in the UFC in 2015. So forget about the Eric Perez loss. All right, we're talking about what happened at least this decade. All right, and he's 2-3 in the 2020s in the UFC, with the wins over Lofron and Stamann. The one loss in that time was to Farid Basharat, and the striking was close, 42-40, but he got taken down 5 times by Basharat. Why would I think that Vince Morales would win this? Vince Morales was not winning when he was in the UFC. Consistently. He got a lot of chances, and I get burned all the time by thinking, well, this guy's level of competition is so good that he...
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
Should not be scared, and I don't think he should be, at least of exiting the fight before the final bell rings. There's only so many fights you can lose over and over again to fighters that you're just outmatched against. And he gave Benito Lopez a good fight. He got a knockdown in that one. But Lapilus, for what he has been able to do, but still born in 1992, for a guy that first appeared in the UFC in April of 2015, this guy's got time ahead of him and has a really fantastic record in the UFC. So Lapilus, his last knockout, or the one in the UFC, June of 2015, his last 5 fights have all been unanimous decisions. 2 of those that he lost, all right? Again, includes the Eric Perez fight. So Lapilus is a rightful minus 365 favorite. This fight to go the distance, over 2.5 rounds, it's minus 300. Give me Lapilus by decision, minus 165. I think that is the most reasonable. I do think that you could get suckered into, going kind of with Eileen Perez. It seems too easy. Sometimes things that seem too easy make sense, and you can overthink that. But Lapilus by knockout plus 475, I think is, a reasonable value. Morales by points, I don't think that, I don't think I'm picking a method of victory for Vince Morales, even if I believed in him here. I think Taylor Lapilus wins this fight, again, 75 to 80 times out of 100, and I'm being a little bit conservative there. Oh, some weird matchups here. They're serving some escargot up to the French fighters on a silver platter when so many cards, the home fighters, like we saw at UFC Noche or any event in Canada recently, hasn't been going well for the home countrymen. Next up, we've got a lightweight matchup between Ludwig Klein and Roosevelt Roberts. Roosevelt Roberts is the plus 7 25 underdog. Ludwig Klein, the minus 1,100 favorite. So let's talk about Roosevelt Roberts first, because that is a crazy, crazy, crazy number to be at. All right. And it seems crazy because Roosevelt Roberts is a guy that's been in the UFC for a long time. I mean, comparatively now, was on the Contender Series for July of 2018, over 6 years ago, and started off, winning. Hey, only has 4 official losses in the UFC, and in the 2020s, those losses came to Jim Miller, Ignacio Bahamondes, and Matus Rebecki. There was the fight that ended up being a no contest against Kevin Kroom. But he hasn't won in the UFC since May of 2020. And he looked like a guy that could win the Ultimate Fighter when he was on it. If him and Austin Hubbard didn't treat their damn semifinal fight like a freaking sparring match. He could have won that. And it was a close fight, but they both just took it to whatever. I talked about that at the time, years ago. So, you look at how he's lost to Matus Rebecki, to Ignacio, to Jim Miller. Finished in all of them. Armbarred twice in the first round. Knocked out in the third round by Ignacio Bahamondes, who was eating him up to that point. August of 2021. We saw Ignacio look great at UFC Noche. But you still look back, and it's like Roosevelt Roberts' best win is Alexander Yakovlev. I think that's probably his best win. It's a guy that when you see him at plus 725, it seems crazy. And then you look at his record, and it's like, why do I keep believing in this guy? Why do I keep believing in the Predator?
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
The season of The Ultimate Fighter plays tricks on you. Ludwig Klein, on the other hand, winner of 5 of his last 6 fights. And that is because his fight with Jai Herbert was a draw, a majority draw, March of 2023. He got wins over Devontae Smith by split decision. Mason Jones by unanimous decision. Ignacio Bahamondes, August of 2023 by unanimous decision. AJ Cunningham with a first-round knockout March of this year, and then hopped right back in pretty quickly and gets a unanimous decision win over Thiago Moises, who he knocked down twice. And credit to Moises for surviving it. All right, Ludwig Klein was born in 1995. This is another one. I would love to sit there and spin a tale on why I think Roosevelt Roberts at plus 725 makes sense. But everything here, because there's always magical variables that we maybe can't take account of, but everything here says that Ludwig Klein is going to tear a hole through Roosevelt Roberts. The question is how. And I think that this could very easily, be an inside the distance win. The last time that Roosevelt Roberts lost by decision, June of 2019, not counting the Ultimate Fighter. This is one where I think to make it a little bit more, now let's see what the actual odds are on it. For this to go over 2.5 rounds is plus 135. And I just don't see that anymore with Roosevelt Roberts. Klein inside the distance is minus 190. I think that's the play. And I think Ludwig Klein is going to be worth a lot in DFS this week. I think that's reasonable. He's a massive favorite. Don't overpay for him, though, because, I think that there's other spots where you might not necessarily have to break the bank. We'll see. And I'll be posting my DFS lineups as usual later this week. But I think Ludwig Klein really wins this fight 80 to 85, maybe 90 times out of 100. How many times can we, wheel Roosevelt Roberts out there and think this guy's battle-tested, sort of, but not really when you look at the quality of competition. Ludwig Klein is battle-tested. You look at the names that he's collected over the last few years. So, yeah, Ludwig Klein to tear a hole through Roosevelt Roberts, minus 190. In some way inside the distance, or just go by knockout, because he hasn't had a submission victory in the UFC. There's a reason that Ludwig Klein by submission is plus 500. So Ludwig by knockout minus 115. That's the real play. Hit it. Next up, we've got a light heavyweight matchup between Umar Sy and Da Woon Jung. Jung is the, and damn hard to find, plus 425 underdog. Umar Sy, the minus 600 favorite. Let's talk about Umar Sy first. 10-0 as a professional, 28 years old. Why do I? Oh, no, I'm wrong. I heard somebody else had to hop out of an upcoming fight. Not Umar Sy. 28 years old, currently ranked number 42 in the world at light heavyweight, according to Tapology. 4 wins by knockout, 4 by submission, 2 by decision. Made his UFC debut May of this year against Tuco Tokos by first-round rear naked choke. He's got experience in KSW, Octagon with a K. I was going to say it's Eagles FC, which I believe is different than Eagle FC. But KSW, Aries, Octagon, his, 2 of his 3 wins before coming into the UFC. Granted, they were all the way back in the summer of 2023, and then he had 4 straight fights canceled in between, including 2 matchups in the UFC for May 18th that ended up being Tuco Tokos that got pulled out, like Antonio Tricoli and Rodolfo Beato. But, he's done fantastic work prior to coming into the UFC and proved it against solid KSW competition. That's always a green light. Dawoon Jung, on the other hand, 15-5-1, 30 years old, 11 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, 2 by decision. So, it started good for him in the UFC. It started real good for him in the UFC. Comparatively early in his UFC career. His one of his losses to Rocky Martinez as a pro, and then went on a huge winning streak. He was supposed to fight Jamal Hill at one point in the UFC, but he started off with wins over Kairis Ibragimov, Mike Rodriguez, had a split draw with Smiling Sam Alvey, and then a unanimous decision over William Knight, and then a first-round knockout over Kendi Nchegwu, November of 2021. He's now coming off 3 straight losses to Dustin Jacoby by first-round knockout, Devin Clark by unanimous decision, and most recently Carlos Ulberg by third-round rear naked choke. Last fight was September of 2023. All right. His last win in the UFC being a first-round knockout over Kennedy, November of 2021. Kennedy, who is slated to fight Justin Tafa in his heavyweight debut coming up October 26th, feels sort of trappish, right? Like, Jung, I don't want to completely lose all faith in Dawoon Jung and what he did coming into the UFC, but it's been a rough run over these last 3 fights, and getting subbed by Carlos Ulberg is problematic, considering that guy had 7 wins by knockout, 2 by decision prior to that, and is mainly known as a kickboxer, as you might know. But he had good wins before this 3-fight losing streak. I understand how you lose to Dustin Jacoby and Devin Clark and Carlos Ulberg. But the 3 in a row and the way that he looked in that Carlos Ulberg fight, because I remember being on him. I think maybe for the last 2 fights, I was on him. As what I think he was the underdog in both. And I can find out, kind of. No, he was the favorite against Devin Clark, minus 250. And he was the plus 230 underdog against Carlos Ulberg. That was where I hopped on him. But that's a problem. So, let's see, I gotta find this again. Umar Sy being, minus 600 seems crazy. Like, this is one where I actually think it's starting to approach being worth, a flyer on an underdog. Just because I think it's very early for Umar Sy, and the circumstances in which his UFC debut happened, it does leave me with some question marks. How prepared was Tuco Tokos, going into that fight? It's not the same quality of competition as Dawoon Jung has faced. Here I go falling into this again. And Sy, as good as his professional experience before the UFC was, it still was limited in volume. So Dawoon Jung plus 425, I don't think that's horrible. I think that, he could win 30 to 40 of these out of 100. I think just, on the UFC experience and the fighters that he has beaten, I think that is reasonable. Umar Sy, though, I still have to opt for him as the most likely victor. 10-0 as a pro, fighting in France, which, in front of his home countrymen, which has actually been a bad thing over the last couple of years of sample size. Sai inside the distance is minus 160. I think that is reasonable. I don't think you have to go any sort of method of victory for Da Woon Jung. Sai, I also like when he is completely split. His inside the distance victory is 4-4, submission or knockout in his professional career. I don't feel the need to split that either, and I think minus 160 is good enough. It maybe throw that in a parlay for a little bit of fun. But like Jung plus 425, it does seem like a wild number. But like I think over this 3-fight losing streak, you do have to like opt for Sai. But as we've seen too, like it seems like some of the bigger underdogs, it seems like some of this, the money coming in is influencing fight in some weird ways. We're coming in with some weird misconceptions. We've seen the biggest upset in the history of the Contender Series over the last few weeks. And another huge one, a plus 550 underdog just last night in the heavyweight main event. So I don't know, Sai inside the distance, Jung money line. I don't have too many crazy thoughts about that. I think like DFS wise, I feel similar to him. Where if Jung is super cheap, I could see me using him to incorporate some of the more desirables on this card. Sai, I think, will be too expensive for me to go with him when I'm a little less sure what the outcome here is. But like, I'm confident that it ends inside the distance. I think that there's a very good chance of that. I don't even know who I'm rooting for in this fight. I like both of these guys. I hope Jung, doesn't take his 4 straight loss. Because he had such a good run starting off in the UFC. Next up, we got another light heavyweight matchup. This one between Ian Cutelaba and Ivan Erslan. Ian Cutelaba. Damn it, these are hard to find. This is Pick'em. This is minus 110. How the Cutelabas have fallen over time. Let's start off with Ivan. Damn, there's a lot of fights on this card. 14-3 as a pro. 32 years old, currently ranked 84 in the world at light heavyweight according to Topology. 10 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 3 by decision. Has not made his UFC debut. This is going to be his UFC debut. The UFC is starting to bring over a lot of people from the KSW ranks and from you love to see it, like the Derridier signing. I don't care what people have to say about that one. Like, bro, it's not 2020. Oh, shut the hell up. If you like these other organizations, if you follow them, this is something that should excite you. I feel really bad for you if you're a fan of MMA. The UFC signed someone not too late in their career, not when they're senior citizens necessarily. She's like, oh, boring. You can't enjoy anything, and you don't deserve to enjoy it. Anyway, good record in KSW coming into the UFC. Winner of 2 of his last 3 fights, dating back to May of 2023. His last 5, 6, 7, 8 wins are by knockout. All right. Last one was February of this year over Bogdanenko at KSW Epic. Now to Ian Cutelaba. All right. This poor guy. Where did it all start going wrong for Ian Cutelaba? Because back in September of 2019, he scored a knockout victory over Khalil Roundtree, who's about to fight for the UFC light heavyweight title. This guy's fought Glover Teixeira. He's fought Jared Cannonier. He's fought Misha Serkinov. He had a draw with Dustin Jacoby. But where the problem started is in that horrific 2-fight legacy against Magomed Ankalaev, where he got knocked out in the first round 2 times in a row. Has the split draw with Dustin Jacoby in a fight where Dustin Jacoby kind of tuned him up on the feet, but he did land 9 takedowns that were of questionable effectiveness. Picks up a unanimous decision win over Devin Clark September of 2021. Now he has lost 4 of his last 5 fights. To Ryan Spann, first-round submission. Johnny Walker, first-round submission. Kennedy Nchegwu, second-round knockout. He then gets a knockout win over Tanner Boser all the way back in April of 2023. And then is coming off a unanimous decision loss to Felipe Lins. So, pick'em-wise, you look at Ivan's losses professionally in his career. 1 by decision, 1 by submission, 1 by knockout. I don't like Cutelaba here. because he's got some stank still associated with him from, really, when it all started against Magomed Ankalaev, and it's really gone downhill, and the only wins being against Devin Clark and Tanner Boser. It's a damn shame, too. I like Tanner Boser. Good luck to him in Global Fight League and that draft that they're going to have. But, here, I think I go with the most obvious method of victory, I think, in trying to pick a fighter on pick'em circumstances. Because, Kudalaba's 13 wins by knockout, sure, but, he didn't put Devin Clark away. He needed 8 takedowns to beat Devin Clark. I mean, he still beat him on the feet, but still went for 8 takedowns. He had 17 combined takedowns in the Clark and Jacoby fights. Maybe you should go back to that. Maybe you should try to take Ivan Erslan down, because the most likely outcome of victory here is Ivan Erslan by knockout plus 170. I think the damage is there on Kudalaba now. We've seen this happen where you keep getting knocked out by great fighters. Eventually, you keep going down the rungs of competition, and then those guys start to knock you out because you've been hit in the head a whole lot of times. Kudalaba, it's unfortunate when you've had to fight good fighters, but again, it keeps going down, and the success level has not been, too much better, even, with the Tanner Boser one being 2 fights ago, but that was well over a year ago. Well over. The most likely method of victory here, Ivan Erslan by knockout plus 170. I think pick'em is fair circumstances. I probably wouldn't pick either of the minus 110. I think that it is that close. If I had to go with one, I'd go with Ivan Erslan. Kudalaba, if you are going Kudalaba, I think you go by knockout, and that's plus 125. And you just get better rewards here with Ivan Erslan by knockout, so might as well take it, because I think that he's going to be the fresher head. He's lost far less in his career. Been hit really hard, way less. Ivan Erslan by knockout, plus 170. Hit it. Not to mention the fact that I am going to be rooting for the guy from KSW to have a successful UFC debut. But this is my drawing a line card, where some people I am just finally giving up on. I don't care what the line is and what it makes them a value on. I don't think they're going to win. Next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Fares Ziam and Matt the Steamroller Frivola. Matt Frivola, the plus 110 underdog. Ziam, the minus 130 favorite. Ziam. All right. 3 straight wins at the UFC level, all by decision, against Michael Figlock, Jai Herbert, and Claudio Puelles. Outstruck Figlock 60-28, 3 takedowns to 1. Outstruck Herbert 61-49 with a takedown, and dominated Claudio Puelles. I mean, on the feet, outstruck him 31-4. Still gets a split decision, even though Puelles had 7 takedowns to 0. So it speaks to the effectiveness of Ziam's strikes, and it speaks to, he was able to make those 7 takedowns not that effective, even though it still ended up being a split decision. That's an important skill set to have. And, it's 2 UFC losses, because the first 2 wins against Luigi Vendramini and Jamie Malarkey, okay, that was a few years ago. They were both decision victories as well. All 5 of his UFC wins are by decision. Only 1 UFC fight out of 7 has not gone the distance, and it was his submission loss to Terrence T-Rex McKinney, February of 2022. The other loss was in his UFC debut at UFC 242, Khabib vs. Poirier to Don Madge. Matt Frivola, on the other hand, 7 years older than Fares Ziam, and he will be at a 4-inch reach disadvantage. The Steamroller had 3 straight wins from January of 2022 to May of 2023, all by first-round knockout against Genaro Valdez, Otman Azatar, and Drew Dober. He is coming off getting decimated by the Frenchman BSD Benoit Saint-Denis November of last year. He also has a first-round loss to Terrence T-Rex McKinney. He's fought Armin Sarukian, Jalen Turner, Lando Veneta, Marco Polo Reyes. Really, outside of the last couple of years, the level of competition isn't super crazy for Frivola, for a guy that's been around as long as he has. And the last time he lost by decision was well over 3 years ago. And that was to Armin Sarukian. I think that Frivola will hit hard. Zion could even be in some danger in this fight. But I think it is most reasonable to think that, like, you know, Zion and his wins, his last 3, it's not against the same level of competition. I am aware. But I think, like, the recent wins, except for Drew Dober on Frivola's side, Frivola always kind of makes sense as an underdog. He is a dog in many senses. Plus 110 is a little closer than I kind of thought that would be. I thought Zion would be a little bit more of a favorite. I'm trying to ignore the home field advantage here. Zion by decision plus 250, that makes the most sense for him. Frivola by knockout plus 575. That's a good prop. I think that those are the two most likely methods of victory. I think Zion is a smart enough fighter to avoid that situation, even if he gets hurt a couple of times. I could definitely see that. I could see this being a close decision. But I think Zion is the fighter that is more well-suited to win on the judges' scorecards. Over 2.5 rounds, that's minus 135. That's all right. Under 2.5 is plus 105. That's pretty much a bet on Frivola, it seems like. I think Zion probably wins this fight like 60 times out of 100. So I think minus 130 is fair. But I think a bet on Paris Zion, money line minus 130, you might as well just go Zion by decision plus 250. That's a tough one. It's closer in the odds than I thought it would be. And it's hard when you got a guy like Zion who just is not like an overwhelming guy. Like, he doesn't like superbly wow you. Frivola, his results can be spectacular, and he has some name recognition on his resume. So that's a tough one. That's one, like, I like Zion by decision. Frivola by knockout is, you know, a reasonable risk to take. But overall, I think that a lot of different things could happen in this fight and a lot of different combinations. And, like, the one I'm interested to see if he actually, like, wins it is Zion, because, like, I'd like to see who would be next after this. Frivola, you know, born in 1990, again, not like he's super old or anything, but, you know, after that finish against Benoit Saint-Denis, you wonder what's next for a guy like that. And there's always going to be fun fights for him. There's always going to be fun fights for Matt Frivola. You get 8 different, you know, legends of the lightweight division have retirement fights against Matt Frivola if you wanted to. The risk would be that he could put them to sleep. Who knows? Next up, we got a featherweight matchup between Morgan Charrier and Gabriel Miranda. Charrier is the... these have been real tough to find and all these odds have been on Bet Online. If you're looking, Charrier is the minus 700 favorite. Miranda, the plus 500 underdog. Let's start off with Gabriel Miranda, 17-6 as a professional, 34 years old. Really solid handlebar mustache. You can't count that out. 1 knockout, 16 submissions, 0 decision victories. 1-1 in the UFC. He's fought in Brave CF. They have an event this weekend, Brave CF 88. You know, he was in Pancrase. He's got some names that sound, you know, that are halfway recognizable. Hiroki Nagaoka in Pancrase. Wagner Rocha in Fight Time 30 back in 2016. His UFC record is 1-1, as I said, and he got knocked out by Benoit Saint-Denis, UFC Fight Night, September 2022. And then he's coming off a first-round rear naked choke victory over Shane Young at UFC 293, September 9th, 2023. He had a fight back in March that was scheduled against Billy Q, and it got canceled, notably because Miranda had to withdraw. Morgan Charrier, the heavy favorite, 19-10-1 as a professional, 28 years old, ranked 65th in the world at featherweight, 11 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 5 by decision. Won his UFC debut with a first-round knockout over Manolo Zucchini. He was in Cage Warriors for a good amount of time. Cage Warriors dating all the way back to March of 2019, which doesn't sound like super long ago, but for him it is, because he's had a great activity level since then. Has a win over William Gomi, and he also has a win against a guy named Alexio Lenik. Probably not the same one. But, who's he lost to? Saladin Parnasse. He's lost in a close fight to Soren Bach, the Cage Warriors 103, a split decision to Jordan Vucinic, a majority decision loss to Paul Hughes. So many wins in Cage Warriors. And, the ones that he lost to other good prospects in close decisions. So 19-10-1, people look at that record and would, maybe sleep on him for that reason. But there's a reason that he was a heavy favorite against Chepe Mariscal, only minus 140. It feels like there was more hype than that, though, going into it. But he lost that fight by split decision, in a fight that I did think that he lost. Numbers-wise, in that fight, he got outstruck 71-49, 2 takedowns to 1. I thought Chepe won that fight, so split decision was a little bit surprising. But the hype, is justified. I think he very easily established himself in a select group of European prospects. This is a guy that the French crowd is going to be super behind. So if I'm taking Miranda, this is one too where it's like, I understand why Morgan is the heavy favorite, but even so, just because of his professional resume, because of how that last fight went in so many fights in Cage Wars, if you're going Miranda at all, might as well go by split decision, plus 1,800. That's fun. That's fun stuff, and it makes potentially bad or nerve-wracking decisions a lot more rewarding. Under 1.5 plus 135. I don't know. I think Morgan is going to come out at a good pace. I think he's going to be looking for a finish. Inside the distance for Morgan is minus 170. I actually think that's really solid. I think Morgan does win this fight 80 to 85 times out of 100. So maybe the money line odds are a little crazy, but not to be deterred. I think inside the distance is a really fair outcome for him. And if you are going in picking a specific inside the distance victory, Morgan by knockout minus 165, by submission is all the way up at plus 650. I think by knockout is the most reasonable way to go. Minus 165 I think is very fair. Or inside the distance, what the hell, minus 170. Morgan is going to be popular in DFS this week as well, for good reason. Next up, I was looking forward to this one, because we got a welterweight matchup between Frenchman Kevin Jousset.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And a fan favorite, the Butcher, formerly Pooh Bear, coming off a no contest only back in March of this year, where he almost got in a fight with Angel Lusa. Afterward, in a fight, he was whooping his ass, if you heard that quote. It's Bryan Battle, Ultimate Fighter winner. All right? I love Bryan Battle. I wish Bryan Battle could be on every UFC card. I like rooting for this guy. Started off in the UFC with 3 straight wins over Gilbert Urbina in the Ultimate Fighter finale. Beats Tresean Gore bad, outstriking him 112-57. Gets a first-round knockout over Takashi Sato. Then the setback against Renat Fakhretdinov, where he just could not get up off his back and only landed 3 strikes. He got ground and pounded the whole fight. Hurt by Renat Fakhretdinov, taken down 7 times. But he has bounced back with 2 straight inside-the-distance victories over Gabe Green and A.J. Fletcher. And I think he was well on his way to a win over Angel Lusa. And that was March of this year, and again, Bryan Battle is actually the minus 164 favorite. Kevin Jousset, the plus 144 underdog. Jousset, actually a year older. He'll be at a 2-inch reach disadvantage. He's actually an inch taller, which is surprising. Bryan Battle always just seems like an absolutely massive welterweight. And I guess he is, but Jousset, first round rear naked choke against Kiefer Crosby, September of 2023 in his UFC debut. Then a really nice decision win over Song Kenan, outstriking him 134-62 with a takedown. So To go a little further back, I suppose, on Kevin Jusset, who is a 10-2 professional, nickname Air Jusset. It's pretty cool. 4 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 5 by decision. His last loss is by split decision at Eternal MMA 67 for that welterweight title. I'm assuming that was in Australia, to Caleb Redio. He was in Eternal MMA and in Shuriken Fight Series, so he was over there in Oceania, if I am right about what Oceania is. Another pro loss on his resume is to Jack Della Maddalena. It's one of his 2 losses. And he's been on a 5-fight winning streak. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5-fight winning streak since December of 2022. Shuriken, Hex Fight Series, but now 2 fights in the UFC. I have to opt for Brian Battle again here. Song Kinon is... I like that guy, you know. I like the wins that he got over Ricky Glenn and Rolando Bedoya. He's had to fight some tough guys in the UFC, notably Alex Morono, Ian Gary, Max Griffin. And he's been in the UFC since November of 2017. But I have nothing to not like about Brian Battle in this matchup. Like Kevin Jusset, it's going to take, it would kind of take, like, for me, I would have to see something like you were able to do kind of what Renat Fakhretdinov, you know, did to Brian Battle. I don't think that's really in the cards here. Brian Battle, you know, I don't know how exactly he gets this done is the problem. And that's also not a horrible problem to have when, for a guy like Brian Battle, I think that he is, you know, a versatile guy. Nice skill set for this level of competition. I think he can get it done in a variety of ways. And Jusset, kind of the same thing. Like, if you like Jusset and you're not as big of a fan of Brian Battle, plus 144 is probably not too bad. But minus 164, that might be as good as I feel about a particular method of victory in this one. And to go back one more time on Kevin Jusset, like his 2 losses, 1 by decision, 1 by knockout, and the knockout came to Jack Della Maddalena. I could see this going the distance. I could easily see this going the distance. Battle by points, plus 145. Jusset by points, plus 215. I think those are the most reasonable, you know, outcomes. Over 2.5 rounds is minus 245, so I think that is accurately reflected. But give me Brian Battle minus 164, and if I'm picking a method of victory, Battle by decision plus 145. If I can get Battle for a reasonable price, like under 8,700 in DK this week, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it for fun. Hit it. Ow! Love Brian Battle. Who says the Ultimate Fighter doesn't give us great products? You know, we don't need them to be champions, but give me a guy I can root for a decade plus, and I feel that in Brian Battle. We got 3 fights left, and we got a featherweight matchup between William Gomi and Yo Anderson Brito. William Gomi is the plus 240 underdog. Yo Anderson Brito, the minus 280 favorite. Let's talk about William Gomi first. All right. 3 fights in the UFC, 3 wins. Decision over Jarno Aarons, September 2022. Split decision over Francis Marshall, April of 2023. And then a 3rd-round knockout over Yanis Gamori, September of 2023. Hasn't fought since then. Born June of 1997, nicknamed the Jaguar. It's pretty sweet. He will have a 1-inch reach advantage. He is 2 years younger as well than Yo Anderson Tubarão Brito. I'm going to stop smacking my lips in the microphone. But I think that this is like, I thought that was a crazy number for Gomi at first to be that much of an underdog, but then, like, look at these last 5 fights for Yo Anderson Brito. Hell, look at the 6 wins that he has at the Contender Series level or above, right? His only loss in the UFC is by unanimous decision to Bill Algeo, January of 2022. He has fought 5 times since January of 2022. All 5 were wins. Has a win over Diego Lopez in the Contender Series, August of 2021 by unanimous decision, outstriking him 44-20 with 3 takedowns. Other wins, a 1st-round knockout over Andre Touchy-Feely. A first-round submission over Lucas Alexander. A first-round knockout over Weston Wilson. Then, these last two. Second-round submission over Jonathan Pierce. And a second-round knockout against Jack Shore. All right? The resume for Brito really is fantastic. It's 17-3-1 as a pro. William Gomi has 2 losses in his career, come by decision and by submission. Brito, and William Gomi did have like 3 fights canceled. He's actually had a decent amount of fights canceled just over the last couple of years. He was supposed to fight Renan Barão in Aries FC back in June of 2022, and he's had 3 straight UFC fights canceled before this one. They're supposed to have in September 2023, so I guess they found him a replacement. That was Lucas Almeida. Was supposed to fight Melzik Bagdasaryan February 2024, and then Gene Silva. Maybe it was better for him that that fight didn't end up happening. But Brito, in his career, he's currently ranked 15th in the world at featherweight according to Tapology. 15 wins inside the distance, and that is where I think you go. Gomi, again, like, what was his last loss? All the way back, to Morgan Charrier. And his other loss was to Saladin Parnasse. So again, like, Gomi's a guy that has fought some really good fighters in Europe and has his own Cage Warriors, UAE, Aries FC resume. So, his last 2 losses were back in 2016. Which is crazy. But majority decision win over Jarno Aaron. Split decision against Francis Marshall. Yanis Gamori, fellow Frenchman, 29 years old. Now 0-2 at the UFC level. Granted, that other knockout loss was to Peyton Talbot. Came in from Brave Seattle. I'm getting off on more of a tangent here. You have plenty of reason to trust Joanderson Brito. And, regardless of how long it's been since William Gomi has lost, Joanderson Brito has been doing this at a high level in the UFC for a good amount of time. And these last 2 wins, those named Jack Shore and Jonathan Pierce, I love Jonathan Pierce in any given fight. But here, Brito inside the distance, plus 105. Getting that at plus money for a guy who's 15 out of his 17 professional wins have come inside the distance. I think that makes a ton of sense. Hit it. Brito, I definitely think is worth shelling out for in DFS this week. Gomi, I don't know if he'll be cheap enough. I think that he absolutely has a chance here. I could think he wins like 30 to 35 of these out of 100. If this goes the distance, Gomi is one of those guys that can win, close decisions with the nature of how he fights. Gomi by split decision is plus 1,000. That's some fun. And Gomi by decision straight up plus 300. I think that is much more reasonable than going Gomi money line at plus 240. So again, I'm fading the French guys here. I'm not doing that for some superstitious fade the home fighters sort of thing. It's just that we've seen what kind of level of fighter William Gomi is. He's better than Jarno Aarons. He's better than Francis Marshall. You got that knockout over Yanis Gamori. Good for him. But Brito has, 1, 2, 3, 4 wins against really high quality opponents. Better than wins that William Gomi has on his resume. So there we go. I'm settling on Joanderson Brito. But again, if I'm going Gomi, by decision or by split decision, I think that is the most reasonable. We are now to the co-main event of the evening. It's taking some time. That's what happens when there's 14 fights on a card. This is a middleweight fight between another Frenchie.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And obviously I'm just doing that because of GSP's French accent. But it's Nasruddin Imavov against Brendan Allen. Number 5 and number 9, respectively, in the world at middleweight, according to Tapology.com. Let's start off with Nasruddin Imavov. He is the minus 210 favorite. Brendan Allen, the plus 180 underdog. Imavov, a guy that, like, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was like the Sean Strickland fight. I don't know where, like, I started to think that this guy wasn't awesome. Maybe it happened after Sean Strickland. Maybe we thought, like, he got, like, quote-unquote exposed against Sean Strickland, getting outlanded 182 to 123 January of last year. But my God, look at the guy's resume. Again, he was one of the murderers row that changed Edmund Shabazian's life for good in November of 2021. Wins over Ian Heinisch as well. Joaquin Buckley. He was on his way to a victory against Chris the Action Man Curtis June of last year before that ended up being a no contest. He's already fought twice this year. He fought twice in 2023 after fighting just once in the year 2022. But he's now on a 2-fight winning streak with a majority decision victory against Roman Dolidze, outstriking him 112 to 34 with a knockdown. How the hell did that fight end up 47-47 on Ron McCarthy's cards? Then, really surprised me, just a few months ago, getting that 4th-round knockout over Jared Cannonier. Now, again, Cannonier didn't look awful in that fight, and maybe it was a slightly early stoppage. But he did look better than Cannonier the entire fight. You know, Calvarello wasn't able to finish Jared Cannonier. Nasruddin Imavov was. He was beating him on the feet. He ends up putting him away. This is a guy with wins now over Heinisch, Shabazian, Buckley, Dolidze, and Cannonier. He deserves every bit of the ranking that he has gotten here at middleweight, and deserves to be in middleweight title conversations, absolutely. Brendan Allen, on the other hand, all right? Crazy thing about Brendan Allen, this is a guy that's always been talked about as a prospect since he came in with 4 straight wins in the UFC, counting the Contender Series against former Tap That guest Aaron Jeffrey, beat Kevin Holland, Tom Breeze, Kyle Dawkins. Then people were calling fraud on him because he lost to a little-known middleweight named Sean Strickland, November of 2020 by 2nd-round knockout. We were all surprised when it happened. It's not so bad in hindsight. Then he had 2 straight wins over Carl Roberson and Punahele Soriano. Then he loses to another guy on what was the Action Man's ascent of the middleweight rankings. On a great run that he was having and got him to be a ranked middleweight. But now, after that loss to Chris Curtis, which was now about close to 3 years ago, in that time, he had 3 fights in 2022, 3 in 2023, and he's already fought once this year. Wins in a row over Sam Alvey, okay. Jacob Malkoon, all right. Then 4 straight rear naked choke victories in a couple different rounds against Christoph Jotko, Andre Muniz, Bruno Silva, and Paul Craig. And he was doing good in the striking department, in those fights that actually lasted a few minutes. Now, he's coming off a split decision victory over Chris Curtis. He needed 6 takedowns really to get that. Like, it was 124 to 112 in the striking. Chris Curtis was doing well in the boxing department against Brendan Allen. And what were the scores on that one? 48-47 was the one for Chris Curtis. And then 49-46 and 48-47 on Derek Cleary and Eric Cologne's cards. Yeah, like, this is one. It's going to be tough to, necessarily call a method of Brendan Allen has looked so good, but he has really progressed since then at a slower pace. Muniz, Silva, Craig, good wins. The Curtis win, it felt redundant, and it was, and I don't know if it accomplished what maybe he hoped it would or what we thought it might. Because after that one, it's all right, you beat Chris Curtis. You want to fight for a middleweight title? I would damn well hope that you would in this fight. And Brendan Allen, not an old guy, born in 1995. He's got plenty of time ahead of him. But Nasruddin Imavov, with what he's done lately, the fact that, he fought a Sean Strickland who was very close to title contention at that point. That started his 2-fight winning streak that got him the title shot. And he didn't get knocked out by Sean Strickland. He's, hurt Roman Dolidze pretty bad. He knocked out Jared Cannonier in 5 rounds. This is going to be 3 rounds. But, I do think Imavov is rightfully favored here. I think that Imavov minus 210 is probably pretty appropriate. I do think he wins this fight, 70 times out of 100. Brendan Allen is going to have to utilize the full scale of his grappling. And be ready to take some hard shots and deal some out of his own. Nasruddin Imavov, to me, has just looked optically like the better fighter, even with as long of a winning streak as Brendan Allen has been on. I think that you could, because this is 3 rounds, I think you could go Imavov by decision, which is plus 200, or go Imavov by knockout plus 175. I think if you're going Brendan Allen, it's by decision, which is plus 375, or hell, go Brendan Allen by submission plus 450. But from what we have seen of Nasruddin Imavov lately, and for what I still feel is lacking in Brendan Allen's resume, with as good as the losses are really on his resume, it's not enough for me to believe in him over Nasruddin Imavov. A lot of the other ranked middleweights, absolutely. Against Imavov, who's still only 14-4. But this guy legitimately could be fighting for a middleweight title in his next fight after this. Who knows? There's a lot of players that are trying to throw their hat in that ring, but it absolutely could be Imavov. So if we're going, the French guys that I think win these fights, Nasruddin Imavov's one of them, by knockout or by decision. Hit it. And in DFS, obviously, he's a play. And so is Brendan Allen. All right, so is Brendan Allen. Because I think he's going to be, cheap, considering, he's a top 10, top 15 UFC middleweight, however you want to shake that out. And now, 13 fights in the books. We are on to the main event of the evening.
Break out the red panties.
And as you all well know, we have a lightweight matchup between Renato Moicano and Benoit Saint Denis, ranked 10th and number 13 in the world, respectively, according to Tapology. Benoit Saint Denis, it's tough. You see the roller coaster that we as fans and that, the UFC itself as an institution takes some people on. Because after Benoit Saint Denis, and by the way, Benoit Saint Denis is the minus 275 favorite here. Moicano, the plus 235 underdog. Saint Denis, after he lost his UFC debut to Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, October of 2021, rattled off 5 straight victories, 3 by knockout, 2 by decision, or 2 by submission. Wins coming against Nicolas Stolze, Gabriel Miranda, Ismael Bonfim, Thiago Moises, who he outstruck 101 to 24 with 5 takedowns. In the second round, he put him away and stood 101 strikes and 5 takedowns. Most recent win was against Matt Frivola at UFC 295, November of last year. Catapults him up. Everybody's talking about this guy being a potential lightweight title contender. Hell, they were talking about him being a BMF belt contender, or whatever it was. And he looked good against Dustin Poirier at times. Ends up getting knocked out in the second round. The Diamond Legend lives on after that fight. So, as meteoric of a rise, people were immediately saying that dumb-ass phrase, fraud check. It's a big leap up in competition. And I'll give you the wins over Ismael Bonfim and Thiago Moises. That's quality competition. And then you step up and you fight Dustin Poirier at UFC 299 on a big stage. On a fight that got him the Islam Makhachev fight. I'm not going to hold that too much against you. I can't. Renato Moicano, on the other hand, born in 1989, he is 6 years older than Benoit Saint Denis. Benoit Saint Denis probably has also, killed people in the French Special Forces. You can't sleep on that kind of cold-bloodedness. Renato Moicano, all right, has now won 5 of his last 6 fights in the UFC. Over Jai Herbert, Alexander Hernandez, both by rear naked choke. Gets another rear naked choke against Brad Riddell, November of 2022. Skips the whole year 2023, then has 2 wins already this year in a span of just a few months. A unanimous decision over Drew Dober in what was a statistically close fight. 23 to 23 in the striking, 3 takedowns to 1. And then is coming off a second-round knockout win over Jalen Turner, April of this year at UFC 300. Renato Moicano's last 4 losses, hell, his last 5 losses. There's only 5 UFC losses, and all 5 of his losses as a professional. Against Brian T. City Ortega, in a fight he very well might have been winning at UFC 214 before he was finished in the 3rd round. You know, I would need to go back and watch it to actually say, but statistically, I mean, he was outstriking Ortega 109 to 65 with 2 takedowns. He has a win over Calvin Kattar, a win over Cub Swanson. His other losses by knockout to Chan Sung Young and Jose Aldo. His last 2 losses to Rafael Fiziev and Rafael Dos Anjos. All right? So immediately against Benoit Saint Denis, he has an advantage in that his opponent's name is not Rafael. That's huge. That's huge for him. And, you know, these wins that he's gotten, the Alexander the Greats, the Herberts, the Riddells, the Dobers, the Turners, that's all stuff that gets you in the rankings, sure. Absolutely. And I think that, like, overall, as a money line play, Moicano plus 235 is not bad. You know, there's still a lot we don't know about Benoit Saint Denis. We know how he has dealt with, you know, at least the class of fighters like Thiago Moises and a prospect who probably wasn't all that he was cracked up to be in his Melbourne theme. But, you know, there's a whole world in between Matt Frivola and Dustin Poirier. And that's a world that Renato Moicano occupies. I think he can win 35, 40, hell, maybe 45 of these out of 100. Plus 235, I think, is an excellent number money line-wise. As far as, like, methods of victory here, I mean, Benoit Saint Denis, his 2 career professional losses by knockout and by submission. I don't know if Renato Moicano knocks him out. Over the course of 5 rounds, it'd be a hard decision to get. That is plus 800 for Renato Moicano. By submission is plus 350. I don't feel the need to go method of victory for Moicano, though. I think plus 235 is plenty of reward. I think if you're going BSD, I think you go by knockout. And that number is at plus 110. I think that's very reasonable. And it's going to be hard to submit Renato Moicano. Even though, you know, BSD has a lot of inside-the-distance victories over his professional career. Knockout's the most likely here. I think it's at plus money. I think you could do a lot worse than plus 110. If I'm going method of victory, I'm going BSD. But otherwise, like money line plus 235 from Moicano, I think those are about of equal values. So I don't know. That's a close one. I think in DFS, I think they both have, you know, value for what their prices are going to be. It's another one where I think like there's a lot of toss-up factors here. You take the emotions of BSD, the deflation of losing by knockout to Poirier, and now the pressure to recover against Renato Moicano in front of your home country, that's going to be a very tough one. So I don't know, there's a lot of fights on this one. I'm starting to take a little bit more of a conservative, not necessarily have to pick something super specific for every fight. But Moicano plus 235, I've seen a lot of hate for BSD this week on the internet. That's crazy, all right? He's really good. There's always been a lot of really good fighters at 155 pounds. If he loses this fight to Moicano, it still doesn't mean that he's bad or that he was a fraud, all right? It means that he lost to Dustin Poirier and Renato Moicano. It's not the end of the damn world. Looking forward to 14 fights Saturday afternoon, UFC Paris. There's so much mixed martial arts this weekend. Folks, this has been episode 151 of RotoBallers' official MMA podcast. Tap that. UFC Paris, Ryzen, PFL Europe, Cage Fury, boxing galore this weekend. And more college football, of course. Plan your weekend accordingly. Again, look out for my DFS Value Picks article coming out on Friday afternoons. For my picks on all that stuff I just mentioned and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Check out my recent interlude episodes with Julius Juicebox Walker and Courtney, the Head Hunter Cameron, new champion at BYB as of this past week. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week. The UFC's back. We got a pay-per-view the weekend after this one. Looking forward to it.
Break out the red panties.
And peace.